Hello, my amazing returning listeners. Welcome to another episode of Shadow Space. I am your host, Laura Brown. As you guys know, Fridays are quickly becoming my favorite days because I get so excited to record a new episode for you guys. And I always like to start out by thanking my returning listeners. As always, I appreciate you guys more than you know. Thank you so much for continuing to spread the word and sharing my content with anyone who may benefit from the topics that we cover here. And to all of my new listeners who are not familiar with who I am your host, Laura Brown. I am a certified trauma-informed breathing and meditation coach. If you'd like to know more about me and my services, feel free to visit my website at shadowspacehealing.com. I publish weekly episodes on my podcast on topics related to self-discovery, personal development, introspection, and the shadow, which is most often just the hidden beliefs that we hold about ourselves, some of the unconscious patterns or ideas that we have about ourselves, and so much more. I really just created this podcast to help guide those who are seeking deeper understanding, answers, or simply wanting to know more about themselves and how they can improve in areas where they may feel stuck. I do cover some sensitive topics on my podcast, so I always like to share a full disclaimer that I am not a licensed therapist. And by all means, the topics and ideas shared on my podcast are not meant to diagnose or treat anyone. All of the topics that I cover on my podcast are references to my own personal experience, my own personal journey, and my own life experiences. So I always like to advise anyone I speak to, especially if you're suffering in a certain part of your life, to really just please reach out and seek the support and help that you may need. It is so important for me to say that because there is so much help and support available out there, lots of professional help that can support you on your journey. And I am more than happy to be a reference and a guide for you guys as well. So feel free to reach out to me as well if you'd like my assistance in that area of your life. Okay? All right. With all that being said, I have a really exciting episode for you guys today. I actually was reading a book that I picked up recently. It's actually a pocket guide, so to speak, kind of a smaller version, but it was so filled with insightful information that I wanted to really take the time and talk about it on my podcast because it is a topic that I have been addressing within myself for a very long time. And I wanted to share some of the information that I learned and some of the advice and just some insightful things that I discovered within the book that I think will be super helpful to you guys. And so today I want to talk about self-esteem. Self-esteem, my friends. So, what I really enjoyed about this book, and by the way, the author's name is Geal Lindenfield. I hope I'm not butchering her last name. And, it's more so a self-help book. So you can kind of read it and also use it as a self-help program, which I really enjoy because you guys know I am so passionate about self-development, personal development, self-discovery, introspection, self-reflection, all of the things. So this book is really great because I find it to be very practical and very insightful, and I just enjoy material like that. But one of the first things they were addressing about self-esteem, or I should say she addressed about self-esteem, because I've also wondered about this for a very long time when I started thinking about my own self-esteem. It's literally, how do you define self-esteem? And I really love what she said in the book because she said in her research, she literally found hundreds of different views regarding and descriptions regarding self-esteem. And so she summarized it in a way that I think is really cool that I want to share with you guys. So her definition of self-esteem is Self-esteem is a dynamic, subjective event rather than any static, tangible thing that can be directly and easily observed and measured. So I'm going to reread that because I feel like I butchered her definition and I want to give it the credence, okay? So she said, self-esteem is a dynamic, subjective event rather than any static, tangible thing that can be directly and easily observed and measured. So, the way I interpreted that is that self-esteem is truly a personal psychological event that takes place within us, right? It is essentially an internal event that takes place within us, but that can also exert a powerful beneficial effect on the external environment. So, meaning other people can actually benefit and enjoy, the benefits and reap the benefits of us having a high self-esteem. But to really say it's one blanket thing, it's really difficult because I think it's a very personal thing. And I also enjoyed the way she described that in the book. She described self-esteem. People with high self-esteem often experience a whole chain of many happenings that take place. And so she further elaborates on this point by sharing an experience of somebody who exudes high self-esteem. And so some of the references she made, I want to share with you guys, is someone with high self-esteem experiences things like, I begin to feel pleasant physical sensations of warmth, relaxation, and vitality within my body. I form a belief, either consciously or unconsciously, that I am an okay being. In my mind, I make specific appreciations about my value. For example, I look attractive, I am strong, I am clever. I form positive value judgments and beliefs about myself and my potential. For example, I deserve to be happy, have my needs met, be liked and loved by other people. I experience a sense of increased confidence and optimism. I feel a sense of trust in the world and people around me, etc., etc., etc. This is 2 pages worth, and I'm not going to read everything to you guys, but I really enjoyed reading that because some of these experiences for me I can identify with when I have experienced a boost in my self-esteem. But what I also find to be very insightful is that she further elaborates on how someone with low self-esteem experiences the low self-esteem experience versus, what we just talked about, the high self-esteem experience. So someone with low self-esteem, for example, would form a negative belief in themselves that they're not an okay human being. So, for example, this person would say to themselves, I form a negative belief in myself that I'm not an okay human being. I begin to feel sensations of coldness, heaviness, and tension in my body. I begin to experience a loss of self-confidence and feel pessimistic. I stop bothering to try to get my needs met or achieve success. I begin to silently resent others who are more successful and powerful and wish them ill. I judge myself to be a nasty person for having such thoughts. I begin to behave in ways that are self-punitive and self-destructive. For example, sacrificing myself to others in an attempt to gain their esteem. And it goes on and on and on, and also touches on so many different experiences that someone with low self-esteem may experience. And so she further elaborates and says, psychologically deprived or damaged children will find themselves less able to withstand the normal wear and tear of life. And what I really, really enjoyed about this book, up to this point, was the references she actually made about what makes somebody have low self-esteem. For example, why do some people have more self-esteem than others? Which is something I've always wondered, right? So she then goes on to say that let's take a moment and look at some of the ways children's natural propensity to feel good about being themselves, may be threatened in the course of everyday life, right? And so she basically talks about her upbringing and how, as children, our self-esteem can either be boosted, bruised, or battered, right? And so depending on how we were brought up, the environments that we grew up in, right? Who cared for us? Some of the things that we were told as children, we begin to form an esteem or a sense of self based on those ideas, based on those beliefs, based on that conditioning. And so for me, I can relate to this so much because I have felt a sense of low self-esteem for a very long time in my life, as well as I've had a boost of high self-esteem. And so I can tell the difference between the two, but really understanding where this is rooted for us and for you is so, so crucial, because we can't begin to heal from some of the things that we are not aware of, right? And so this is where the shadow work comes in, because in the context of working through the shadow, right, to boost your self-esteem, for example, we may have to peel back those layers and look at where those things are rooted for you. And so oftentimes it's rooted in how we were brought up. It's rooted in childhood. And she goes on to further, give examples in the book about, some of the things that we may say to our children, or that were probably said to children, by the adults that were around them, that may affect them. But as adults, some of us are unaware of those things and how they impact children, myself included, because as she was given those examples, I certainly found certain things that I have said to my children that I really kind of felt guilty about after reading that. I was like, oh my gosh, now I see I've done some damage to my kids, but I wish I knew better. I wish I knew more, right? And so sometimes the things that were said to us are what makes us who we are until we become aware of those things. And then we can begin to work on those things, to improve upon those things, or to make any kind of changes that we would like to experience instead. And so when it comes to self-esteem and myself, for example, as a child, I grew up in an environment that was very unstable at times. I would even say very tumultuous at times. I had a very rough childhood. I come from a family of divorced parents, and we moved around a lot. I grew up with people that were not directly my parents. And so some of the things I heard growing up really impacted me, because I never received the confidence boosters I needed at the time growing up. And I did not realize that till much later in my life. As a matter of fact, I received the opposite of that. I was highly criticized as a child. A lot of the things that made me unique were pointed out as a negative to me instead of a positive. For example, I looked very different than the rest of my family. My nose is different. I have a very small nose. I don't know what to tell the world, but my nose is very unique to me. But hey, I guess that was so unique and different to my family that it was picked on quite a bit. The size of my head. I have a ginormous head. Honestly, I do. Now I can laugh at these things. But I do. There are very few little hats that will fit this massive head of mine. But all of those things were pointed to me as a criticism, a form of criticism. Some of the things that I wanted to go for, my dreams, my aspirations, and my wishes were misunderstood by my family. They did not realize that I was so passionate about dance that I probably would have ended up as a dancer somewhere in the world, because that was really what brought me joy and freedom. It was my sense of just letting myself be loose and immersing myself in the beats of the music. I just had a natural talent for dance, and I wanted to dance, but that was perceived incorrectly. My family thought I was just this person who wanted to party forever. So anyway, there's a long list of things that I won't, bore you guys with. But as I began to reflect on some of those things, I started to see where my self-esteem, or lack thereof, was rooted, and how that played into my sense of self-worth, because both of those things are tied together. And so I love when she talked about, the upbringing in childhood, because depending on what your experience was as a child, you may have a high sense of self-esteem, or you may have a very low sense of self-esteem. But the good news with both is that when you come from a high sense of self-esteem, the benefits of that can be felt by all of the people around you. And she also talks about that in her book. People naturally feel drawn to you. They feel safe around you. They feel safe to be themselves. They feel good to be in your company. They can just feel your presence, and someone with high self-esteem is not somebody who wants to appear superior or inferior. They just know that they are valuable and they're enough in who they are. So they don't make you feel less than. And so some of those benefits can be sensed and felt right away from someone who has a high self-esteem. However, someone with low self-esteem can also impact the world and those around them negatively. Because if they come from a sense of lack, a sense of less than, a sense of unworthiness, they can't present anything other than that. And so the people around you, or your environment, may be, unfairly affected by the low self-esteem issues that you may struggle with, or someone may struggle with, I should say. But the good news with that is, and this is why I wanted to talk about this on my podcast. The good news is we can always change this. We can cultivate a sense of high self-esteem. It is not that we are born with it. Sometimes I think, like I said, our environment and how we were brought up has a huge impact on it and makes a huge difference. So if you're born in a family that is always, instilling a sense of confidence in you, of course, naturally, you're going to grow up feeling more empowered, feeling more capable, just feeling good about yourself and having a more positive sense of life and a more positive sense of self. But if you didn't grow up in an environment like that, naturally, the other things ensue. But when we come to realize this, and this is where the work begins in the shadow context, is that we can make a difference for ourselves. We can engage in the shadow work to discover where these issues are rooted for us. It's not that all is lost. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because when I encounter people, and let me just say, you never encounter people with a low sense of self-esteem who will tell you that they have a low sense of self-esteem. Nobody will ever say that, because we all wear such a beautiful mask to hide behind all the things that can, by the way, be perceived anyway. So you're never going to come across somebody who's going to tell you or raise their hand and say, oh, by the way, I suffer greatly from a low self-esteem. That just doesn't happen. But what happens is the habits and the behaviors and their, how they impact their environment is what can be felt and what can be sensed, right? And this is why the shadow work is so important, because when we work on ourselves and these areas of ourselves, we begin to gain more hope. We begin to be hopeful instead of feeling hopeless that we'll never get out of this phase of life, or that we are just, doomed to be this way. We can begin to feel a sense of empowerment that we can make these changes for ourselves. But the important thing is we have to begin to realize where the root causes of these things come from. Was it that you had an extremely critical family, perhaps like mine? Or did you grow up in an environment where there might have been some, unhealthy habits being demonstrated or exhibited? Did you grow up in an environment where perhaps there was a lot of comparison, or where you felt put down a lot? These are all things that we have to dive within ourselves to discover for ourselves, because no one can do this work for us, unfortunately. Even the people that may have caused us to feel this way about ourselves, they cannot do this work for us. And they can't undo what's been done, unfortunately. It is really just all up to us to begin to do this work and actually want to make this change for ourselves. In the shadow work, when we can identify and pinpoint where these things are rooted, that's when we can begin to do the work. Because we can instill a sense of confidence in ourselves again. It is possible. This is all possible because we can practice the tools. We can empower ourselves with the information we need. We can empower ourselves with the guidance we need to do this work and begin to change our life. It is possible. Take it from someone who has suffered greatly from a low sense of self-esteem. Because the other thing that is important to mention is that a low sense of self-esteem is most often rooted in our belief of ourselves, in the belief that we have about ourselves. And guess what? When we have a belief, we can also change that belief, because beliefs are changeable. Sometimes they're hardwired in us, and we may feel like we can't change our beliefs, but they are certainly changeable. We just have to understand why they're so hardwired the way they are, and that we can begin to unravel the things and begin to do this work for ourselves. And this is so important for me to share, because I have made so many changes in my life. And the biggest changes I have made is, I'm getting emotional here, is in my sense of self-worth. Because I can tell you there was a time in my life where I had none. I had no self-worth. I did not know that I was enough. I did not know that I was worthy. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't even know what that felt like. I didn't even have a sense of self, And fortunately for me, I have always come to everything that I do in my life with great intentions, with a genuine care and interest, and really just always have offered my heart purely and genuinely. Fortunately and unfortunately, because, it's cost me, or I shouldn't say cost me. It didn't really cost me. I have experienced certain things in my life that have helped me grow, but that were really tough lessons. Because when you are a person like that, people can sense that too. And sometimes when people don't have the best intentions, they can tend to want to take advantage of that. So that's kind of what I was saying, that's what I meant with that. But anyway, I digress. So anyway, the proudest work I've ever done with myself is working on my self-esteem. And this is something that I have had to do and that I continue to do because it's so important to me. When you value yourself, when you know your worth, you show up differently. You show up differently for yourself, which is the most important thing. It's not about others. Others can feel it and they can see it and they can sense it, they can smell it, right? And they can experience it, as we have learned in this book. But it's really for yourself, because you begin to make decisions differently, you begin to choose things differently, and you begin, to make some choices and decisions in your life that serve you, that are in service to you, right? And so this is why it's so important to work on your self-esteem. And it's also so important for me to reiterate that you can work on your self-esteem. It is not too late. You can work, you can change your self-esteem, okay? I am proof of that. Someone who knew nothing about it, who's made such amazing transformations in her life, on her own, with the guidance, of course, of the divine. I always say that, of the Most High. But nonetheless, it is something that I have consciously made a choice to do in my life, and something that I have seen great benefit from. And so if you're out there and you are struggling with this area of your life, I want you to know that there is hope, that you can make a change, and that you are empowered to do so. Okay, guys? With that being said, I have so much more to share on this topic. I will probably come back with another topic on this to further elaborate, because I'm still reading this book, and the next steps in the book talk about the golden keys to self-esteem and just the action steps we can take to boost our self-esteem. And I want to share those with you guys because, like I said, it is something that we can really make a positive difference on for ourselves in our life, okay? So I'll probably come back with that on my next episode, or on the next episodes following this one. So make sure to tune back in to just hear that from myself. And with that, I'm going to leave you guys here today. There's so much to talk about on this topic, but honestly, I only have 30 minutes. So I'm going to leave you guys here today. And as always, I like to say, I hope this episode was insightful for you guys, or enlightening in some way. But as always, please remember to continue to spread your light, and also remember the light exists within you. Okay? As always, love and light, peace and blessings. Have a fantastic weekend, guys. And I will chat with you guys again on my next episode. Bye.